I was a defective alpha who couldn't even release a proper scent. Yet my mother shoved a breathtakingly flawless top-tier Omega wife into my life, handing down an absolute ultimatum: get him pregnant within 2 months. But this stunning beauty guarded against me like a fortress. Clutching my practically shattered tailbone, I ended up splayed out on the rug for the umpteenth time, hissing in pain. If I couldn't conquer him, I could at least run. So, I turned right around and wrapped my arm around a delicate, yielding peach, scented Omega at a bar. Just as our lips were about to meet, crash! The heavy wooden door of the private booth was violently kicked off its hinges. My untouchable wife effortlessly tossed that peach Omega out the door with a single hand, instantly locking an inescapable grip on me before I could flee. "Why are you running? Weren't you desperate for a child?" He loomed over me, an absolute domination radiating from him as his lips brushed the shell of my ear. A dangerous, dark, golden glint churned deep within his eyes. Make sure you carry as many as you want." "Wait a damn minute. Weren't you supposed to be an Omega? How the hell are you an alpha?" Main text: Edgar was a defective alpha, so unrefined he could barely mark an ordinary Omega. But his domineering mother didn't care. With a single wave of her hand, capitalizing on the Jones family's bankruptcy crisis, she ruthlessly thrust the notoriously untouchable top-tier Omega, Arnold, right into Edge's bridal chamber. The dim amber nightlight cast a deeply ambiguous silhouette across the lavish marital bed. Arnold, a breathtaking Omega who looked as though he had stepped right out of a classic oil painting, was currently hugging his arms tightly. His long legs were pressed flush against the corner of the wall, the corners of his eyes lifted in high alert, looking exactly like a solitary crane guarding against a predator. Edgar let out a cold scoff. He slammed the glass of hangover, curing honey water onto the nightstand with a heavy thud. The liquid splashed, catching the icy light. "Get out. I need to sleep." Edgar didn't even bother lifting his eyelids. His knuckle-defined fingers grabbed his tie, tearing it loose in sheer frustration. The suit jacket hit the floor. With a flick of his fingertips, he was just about to unbuckle his belt when his movements violently hitched. In the shadows of the corner, Arnold's gaze, which was supposed to be averting out of modesty, was now uncontrollably superglued to the dip of Edge's waist and the curve of his hips. In the dim light, Arnold's Adam's apple bobbed heavily. A muffled, breathy whisper slipped through his slightly parted lips. So narrow. Edgar's brow twitched. He spun around, closing the distance instantly. "What did you just say?" Arnold pulled his neck back as if he had been electrocuted, his frantically masking eyelashes trembling violently. 2 seconds later, he stubbornly tilted his chin up, yet the tips of his ears betrayed a highly suspicious flush. "We're married. If you want to, we can. But only kissing and touching. We can't go all the way." Edgar practically laughed out loud. He looked down. No, it was only when he stepped closer that he realized he was actually half a head shorter than the Omega standing right in front of him. That listed 180 centimeters height was absolutely padded. Grinding his back teeth, Edgar couldn't be bothered to waste his breath. He yanked his belt free, the metal buckle letting out a crisp, sharp clink. "Two choices. Let me take you or get out." He stood there with his shirt hanging completely open, advancing step by step. Arnold's towering frame plastered flush against the wall like a startled rabbit. His eyes darted everywhere, yet time and time again, they uncontrollably dropped right back down to the exposed skin of Edgar's chest. "Even if you try to seduce me, it won't work." Arnold's throat was impossibly tight. A wicked smirk curled on Edgar's lips. He stepped right between Arnold's legs, leaning his upper body forward. Tilting his head slightly, he let his scorching breath spill entirely over the sensitive shell of Arnold's ear. "Baby, are you sure you don't want to try? Your husband is incredibly good at this." Visibly, every single muscle in Arnold's body snapped taut. In the very next heartbeat, a stark drop of scarlet fell from the high bridge of his nose, landing on his pristine white shirt collar with a soft pat. Edgar arched a brow. "Hey, a drop of crimson just fell from your nose." Arnold violently shoved him away, his handsome face flushing so hard it looked ready to drip color. He frantically clutched the barrier patch at his nape, panting heavily as he scrambled for an excuse. "It's just the dry heat. Don't get the wrong idea." He immediately crashed through the door, fleeing the scene in absolute panic. Staring at the wildly swinging door, a mocking sneer pulled at the corner of Edgar's mouth. What a coward. To his surprise, the news of them sleeping in separate rooms reached his mother's ears the very next day. An absolute ultimatum, backed by the freezing of all his credit cards, was slammed right into Edgar's face. Within 2 months he had to get Arnold pregnant. In the villa's guest bedroom, sunlight pierced through the sheer curtains. Edgar stood by the bed, grinding his teeth as he stared intently at the deeply sleeping Arnold. On that snow-white nape, the slightly raised gland rose and fell smoothly with his even breathing. A dangerous, intoxicating thought took shape in Edge's mind. Overwhelm him with alpha pheromones. Dominate his senses and induce his heat. Edgar climbed onto the mattress without making a sound. Arnold groggily blinked open those stunning eyes. He had barely managed to slip out the word "you" when a ruthless flash cut through Edge's gaze. Swish, he ripped the blankets away. Seizing the half-second Arnold was stunned, Edgar grabbed his shoulder and flipped him over with undeniable dominance. Throwing a long leg over him, he pinned his knee heavily against the small of Arnold's back. With one hand acting like an iron vice, he pressed down on the struggling back of Arnold's head. "Edgar, what are you doing?" The voice, muffled into the pillow, was frantic and panicked. Arnold's firm waist and abdomen began to thrash wildly. Thrown off balance by the sheer physical power, Edgar acted on pure instinct, his legs locking into a death grip around that incredibly powerful narrow waist. He let out a sharp, commanding growl. "Don't move!" Miraculously, Arnold actually froze. Edgar lowered his upper body, his chest pressing flush against the other man's broad back. He purposely let his lips graze against Arnold's burning earlobe. What do you think a man and his wife do when they're in bed together? A violent shudder tore through Arnold, as if he had been struck by lightning. Burning with humiliation, he raised a hand to cover his ear, burying his face even deeper into the mattress. "Stop teasing me, or you're going to regret it." Edgar couldn't care less. Locking his eyes onto that fragile nape, he opened his mouth, bared his sharp canines, and sank them down hard. Yet, the very second the tips of his teeth brushed the skin, a terrifying, overwhelming power erupted from beneath him. The world spun. Edgar's vision blurred, and before he knew it, he was flipped through the air by sheer brute strength. The back of his head slammed against the headboard with a devastating thud. Fuck. Who's the real alpha here? Edgar clutched his ringing head, seeing stars from the agonizing impact. Arnold scrambled over in a complete panic, his red-rimmed eyes filled with absolute helpless dismay. "Are you okay?" "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." Having been smothered in the pillow for too long, the soft hair framing Arnold's forehead was damp with sweat, his cheeks glowing with an unnatural, feverish flush. He carefully, tenderly massaged Edgar's aching spot with his warm fingertips. He even pursed his plush, pink lips to blow a gentle, soothing breath over it. Looking at this stunning, guilt-ridden face hovering so breathtakingly close, Edge's eyes darkened. He smoothly tilted his head, affectionately nuzzling his cheek right into the palm of Arnold's large hand. His eyes curved into a sickeningly sweet crescent. "Wife, you're so good to me." Arnold's movements instantly froze. His fingertips curled inward as if burned by an open flame, his long lashes fluttering wildly in absolute apprehension. It's the least I could do." Edgar let out a soft chuckle. He tilted his neck back, intimately brushing his nose against Arnold's. His breath was an intoxicating whisper. "I really want to kiss you, wife. Can I?" Giving him absolutely no room to escape, Edgar violently cupped the back of Arnold's head. Pulling him down, he sealed those thin lips in a fierce, inescapable kiss. The very second their lips locked, Edgar completely released his unrefined pheromones. In a flash, a visible deep violet-red gleam rippled through the air. Phantom, hallucinogenic vines of datura sprouted wildly in the shadows, slithering up the bed canopy and enveloping everything around them in a suffocating, intoxicatingly decadent filter. This unrefined datura illusion would be completely imperceptible to a normal person. But to the terrifyingly hypersensitive senses of a top-tier Omega, it was nothing short of a devastating tsunami. Under the corrosion of the deep violet light, those originally clear, stunning eyes saw their pupils violently contract before rapidly shattering into a hazy, glazed-over obsession. Edge's lips hooked into a smirk. He abruptly pulled back, deliberately tearing the distance open. NNNH. Utterly dissatisfied with his prey's escape, Arnold let out a strained, muffled groan. Like a beast completely bewitched, a feverish crimson spider webbed the edges of his pupils as he lunged forward, desperately hunting for that kiss. Edgar tilted his head to dodge, but Arnold's knuckles turned white as he grabbed Edgar by the hair, forcefully yanking him closer. There was no finesse, only an out-of-control tearing and swallowing. At the same time, Arnold's towering frame pinned Edgar down entirely. Driven purely by instinct, he rubbed restlessly against Edgar through their clothes. Watching the untouchable, top-tier Omega completely reduced to a slave of his desires, Edgar licked his lips in triumph and planted a loud, resounding kiss on those ravished crimson lips. "Baby, don't rush. Hubby will satisfy you right now." Disadvantaged by their size difference, Edgar could only mutter sweet coaxing words to the frantic, massive beast on top of him, while agonizingly twisting his hips to shift himself downward inch by inch. Ignoring his ridiculous size disadvantage, he grabbed and ripped away the very last of Arnold's clothing. He had to admit this top-tier Omega's body was an absolute gift from the creator. Broad, imposing shoulders, tightly sculpted, defined abs, and those two long, powerful, pale legs. Edge's eyes were practically glued to the sight. Excitedly, he lifted one of Arnold's long legs, a gaze of absolute certainty burning in his eyes. Thump. A sudden, tearing agony erupted in his abdomen. Before Edgar could even let out a scream, an overwhelming force kicked and hurled him entirely through the air. He traced a pathetic, miserable arc through the air before crashing heavily onto the rug with a loud thud. His tailbone felt like it had split open, burning with pain, and his knees and elbows were bruised purple from the impact. Fuck. Edgar's face twisted in agony. He scrambled up from the floor, absolutely furious. On the bed, Arnold, who was just moments ago driven completely out of his mind by the pheromones, somehow had his clarity back. He was scrambling frantically to pull the blankets up, wrapping himself so tight that only his panicked, terrified face was visible. If it weren't for the fact that this guy was an Omega, Edgar absolutely would have charged forward and smashed a fist right into that beautiful face. "Arnold, what the fuck is wrong with you?" Arnold gripped the edge of the blanket tightly, his knuckles stark white. An imperceptible panic flashed in his eyes before he stubbornly lifted his chin. "I told you no. How could you just force yourself on me without my permission?" Thinking back to his two utterly humiliating failures, Edgar took a deep breath, forcefully shoving down the raging fire in his chest. Rubbing his throbbing abdomen, his gaze turned icy. "How much money do you want?" Arnold froze, a stunning confusion filling his beautiful eyes. "Huh? Stop playing the saint. Didn't you sell yourself to me just for the money?" Edgar scoffed coldly, deciding to just lay it all out. "As long as you give me a child, I don't care what you do afterward. Name your price." "I don't want your money." Arnold's voice pitched up violently, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. But immediately after came an unspeakable, awkward tension. This isn't about money." His face flushed entirely red. He held his breath for a long time before managing to squeeze out a dry, pathetic sentence. "It's just no, okay? Not about the money?" Edgar narrowed his eyes. Then Hez just disgusted that I'm a defective alpha. The final thread of his sanity burned away in an instant. Edge's face darkened completely, every word grinding out from between his clenched teeth. "Arnold, don't push your luck. You are nothing but someone my family bought. You have no right to say no. You are having this child, whether you want to or not." He absolutely refused to accept this. Since when did an alpha get completely overpowered by an Omega? Edgar let out a low growl and lunged back onto the bed like a hunting cheetah. 3 seconds later, thump. Edgar traced another incredibly familiar arc, landing splayed out in the exact same spot. He refused to believe it. 10 minutes later, when Edgar was mercilessly kicked off the bed for the 10th time, lying spread, eagle on the rug, questioning his entire existence, he finally believed it. A smart alpha knows when to cut his losses. Hissing in pain, he dragged his battered, practically falling, apart body out the door, limping away like a defeated war veteran. He was frustrated. Unfathomably frustrated. Edgar returned to his room, angrily throwing on some clothes, and dialed his childhood friend Daniel. "Come out for a drink." He had just limped into the garage and fired up the engine when someone slammed their hand against the passenger window. "Where are you going in the middle of the night?" Edgar rolled down the window, lifting a lazy eyelid. Arnold was still wearing that thin sleepwear, standing barefoot in the chilly early autumn wind. His face was pale, his eyes filled with naked, unmasked panic. What an actor. He was kicking me like he wanted me dead just moments ago, and now has putting on this fake, concerned face. Disgusting. A wicked, malicious sneer hooked onto the corner of Edge's mouth. Where else? To find an Omega who's actually willing to give me a child? Arnold's pupils contracted violently, like a trapped beast pushed to the brink. "No. You can't go." Throwing all caution to the wind, he lunged forward, grabbing onto the car door with a death grip. Get lost. Edgar's patience snapped. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The sports car roared like a beast, tearing forward. In the rearview mirror, Arnold was thrown violently to the ground by the momentum, tumbling into a miserable heap. Edgar coldly withdrew his gaze. Serves him right? Inside the private booth of the bar, the lighting was dim and heavy with an intoxicating ambiguity. After listening to Edge's ordeal, Daniel gloated, laughing until his sides hurt. With a casual wave of his hand, he called over a delicate, yielding little Omega, who practically radiated a sugary, sweet peach scent. You're just too soft-hearted. Daniel swirled his glass, his eyes filled with a suggestive glint. When dealing with a rebellious one like that, you should just assert absolute domination. Keep him bound to you, and see how much he thrashes around then. Forget it. It's pointless. It's not like I absolutely need him. Seeing his chance, the peach-scented Omega melted against him like he had no bones. Edgar naturally slipped an arm around his impossibly slender waist. Emboldened, the Omega straddled Edgar's lap, snatched the wineglass from his hand, and cast him a smoldering, heavy-lidded look. Mr. Edgar, let me feed you. Sure thing, baby, Edgar chuckled softly. But he didn't expect the Omega to hold the wine in his mouth, puckering his lips as he leaned in. Edgar instinctively tried to pull back. Just then, bang! The heavy wooden door of the booth was kicked violently open by an overwhelming force, slamming against the wall with a deafening echo. Edgar! A furious roar ripped through the entire room. Startled, Edgar looked up. Arnold stood at the doorway, missing a shoe, his sleepwear slightly soiled. Those eyes, which were usually breathtakingly beautiful, were now webbed with crimson. He stared obsessively at the Omega on Edgar's lap, his gaze so feral it looked as if he was ready to devour them alive. The peach Omega in his arms shuddered violently at the terrifying, inescapable magnetism. With a loud gulp, he swallowed the wine in his mouth and buried himself desperately into Edge's chest like a frightened quail. Edgar furrowed his brows, instinctively patting his back to soothe him. That tiny gesture landed in Arnold's eyes like oil on a blazing fire. He clenched his fists violently, his nails digging deeply into his palms. In the very next heartbeat, the rims of his eyes flushed a fragile red. Tears began to fall like pearls from a broken string, his voice tearing out in pure, devastated despair. Hubby, do you not want me anymore? That single cry was utterly earth-shattering. The originally chaotic bar corridor plunged into instant dead silence. Soon after, countless heads poked out from the surrounding booths. Onlookers quickly blocked the doorway, their whispers flooding in like a rising tide. Tisk, abandoning his wife. That Omega is absolutely gorgeous. How could that alpha be so heartless? Exactly. What a piece of trash. A few furious curses directed at Edgar erupted from the crowd. Hearing the insults, Arnold actually turned around, his eyes swimming in tears as he pleaded with the crowd. Don't yell at him. My husband is incredibly good to me. It's all my fault. I just didn't take good enough care of him. As he cried, he looked at Edgar with the pitiful, heartbroken gaze of an abandoned puppy. Paired with his absolutely tragic appearance, Edgar was instantly branded as the ultimate, unforgivable scumbag by everyone present. Is this guy completely out of his mind? Edgar's head throbbed agonizingly. He shoved the Omega out of his arms, took long strides toward the door, and grabbed Arnold by the wrist. He roughly yanked him into the booth and slammed the door shut, locking it with a heavy click, entirely severing those prying eyes. Only the four of them were left in the room. Edgar looked down at Arnold's paper, thin sleepwear, and that single freezing red bare foot, his brows knotting tightly together. The vicious mocking remarks he had locked and loaded mysteriously caught in his throat the moment he met those red-rimmed, bunny-like eyes. What exactly are you playing at? Edge's voice was muffled, lacking its usual commanding weight. Arnold sniffled. Instead of answering, he lodged a pitifully wronged complaint. You're so mean to me. Edgar took a deep breath, just about to lose his temper, but Arnold carefully grasped his hand in return. His freezing fingertips trembled slightly. Those stunning eyes were so full of unshed tears it felt like if Edgar dared to say the word no, the resulting flood would drown the entire bar. Hubby, I was wrong. Please don't throw me away. Fuck. Edgar cursed inwardly. This was his damned fatal weakness. He just couldn't harden his heart when faced with a fragile, weeping beauty. I never said I didn't want you. Edga's tone softened completely on its own, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible trace of guilt. You're the one who keeps hiding from me. Arnold automatically filtered out the second half of that sentence. Pointing at the terrified Omega on the sofa, he launched a tearful, devastated accusation. But I saw you holding him just now. You were practically kissing him, your wife. How could you do this with someone else right in front of me? The intense guilt of being caught red-handed instantly skyrocketed. Edge's brain short-circuited, and an incredibly lame lie slipped right out of his mouth. You saw it wrong. He was just walking by and tripped by accident. I was just helping him up. Before the words even settled in the air, Mr. Edgar the Peach Omega, completely oblivious to the danger, swayed his hips as he closed in. He affectionately looped his arms around Edgar, his sickeningly sweet pheromones drilling straight into their senses. Who is he? Edgar went entirely rigid. With mechanical stiffness, he turned his head, looking at Arnold in absolute despair. Sure enough, the very last glimmer of hope in Arnold's eyes shattered. Massive tears crashed onto the rug, his shoulders shaking violently as he sobbed. And you said you weren't? Why don't you dare tell him who I am? I knew it. You were just lying to me. Do you not want to claim me at all? I embarrass you, don't I? A massive, heavy blame crashed down from the heavens, hitting Edgar so hard his head spun. Why aren't you saying anything? Are you admitting it? Arnold advanced step by agonizing step, his finger trembling as he pointed at the Peach Omega. Do you want to divorce me so you can run off and be with him? Of course not. Edgar panicked, blurting it out. Heaven knew, even though he was a bastard, he knew exactly how rare a top-tier Omega was. Not to mention, Arnold looked exactly like his type. Bringing him out was an absolute flex of status. If it wasn't for the fact that this man fought tooth and nail to keep him from touching him, then why are you so afraid to tell him who I am? Arnold clung to that single point like a vice, relentlessly aggressive. Utterly dizzy and thoroughly trapped, Edgar lost all capacity to think rationally. Under Arnold's overwhelming, dominant pressure, he pointed at Arnold on pure instinct and gave a dry, stiff introduction to the Omega beside him. Oh, Hez, my wife. Before the words even settled, Arnold's previously wronged face instantly turned as cold as frost. Did you hear that? Edgar is my husband. Arnold took a step forward, looking down at the Omega with an imposing aura. Get lost. Don't you ever pester him again. With that, he unceremoniously shoved the Omega to the floor. Hey. Edgar was startled, instinctively reaching out to help the guy up. Use your words. Why are you pushing people? Apologize right now. Arnold let out a cold scoff, arrogantly tilting his chin up. Hez a homewrecker trying to seduce a married man. Why should I apologize? He should be thankful I didn't ruin his face. With such formidable combat power, where was even a trace of the fragile, pitiful shadow from just a moment ago? Edgar's head throbbed. He waved his hand in frustration, shooing the sobbing Omega out the door. While he was at it, he also kicked out Daniel, who had been eating up the drama the whole time, and was now petrified into a statue. Before leaving, the look Daniel gave Edgar was like looking at a foolish king bewitched by a wicked consort. Tisk. You. Sigh. Whatever. The private booth finally fell quiet. Edgar rubbed his throbbing temples, the realization hitting him belatedly. Wait a minute. This little brat came running over in the middle of the night to cause a huge scene. What gave him the right to question him so righteously? He was just about to lash out when Arnold suddenly retracted all his sharp edges. He gave him a deep look, his voice dropping low. Do you really want a child that badly? Edgar froze. He nodded, confused. Yeah. The old lady wanted a grandson. What else could he do? Arnold stayed silent for a long time. The atmosphere in the booth grew so oppressive it was hard to breathe. Just when Edgar thought he was about to pull another trick, Arnold suddenly lifted his head. He gritted his teeth, looking as if he was making an agonizing decision. Fine. I agree to it. Edgar's eyes instantly lit up. But Arnold stared intently into Edgar's eyes. You have to promise me. Once we do this, you will never abandon me. And you can absolutely never go looking for other Omegas. He abruptly grabbed Edge's hand, raising it high. With his other hand he pulled out his phone and hit record. Swear it right now. Edgar stared at the dark lens of the phone camera, furrowing his brows as his brain worked in overdrive. What kind of game was this little fox playing? Was he afraid that once he had the child, he'd lose his value and be kicked out, causing the Jones family to lose their financial backing? Right? It definitely had to be about the money. Having figured that out, the tension in Edgar's chest dissipated. He wasn't exactly the type to mess around anyway. This condition was a piece of cake. No problem. Edgar patted his chest and, looking straight into the lens, solemnly swore a vicious oath. If I ever betray Arnold, may I never be able to get hard again for the rest of my life. A good man always keeps his word. Looking at the absolute top tier Omega on the bed, obediently stripped of his clothes and lying flat on his back, the corners of Edge's mouth hooked into a wild smirk. The compromise bought with that vicious oath was totally worth it. Everything was going smooth as silk? Right, until Edgar, full of anticipation, was just about to start. The man beneath him suddenly violently flipped over. The world spun. Edgar's vision blurred, and before he knew it, he was the one pinned face down against the mattress, with an inescapable grip. What's wrong? Edgar twisted his head to look back, utterly bewildered. A scorching, heavy pant brushed past his ear. That usually aloof voice was now devastatingly hoarse, dripping with unmasked aggression. Hubby, just lie there. Let me do the work. Edgar arched a brow in absolute disbelief, his face full of suspicion. Are you sure you can handle it? The man behind him swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing heavily. His long, powerful knuckles glided down the ridge of Edge's spine, inch by inch, playing him like a piano with a dangerous rhythm. Oh, absolutely. Edgar was amused. What kind of waves could a mere Omega possibly make? He waved his hand magnanimously. All right, whatever you want. Let me just flip over. Thud. The hand on his waist suddenly clamped down with terrifying power, nailing him flush against the bed like an iron vice. Immediately after, an intensely aggressive, scorching breath pressed against Edgar's completely defenseless nape gland without a single shred of warning. A bone-chilling shiver shot violently up Edgar's spine. Arnold, what the hell are you doing? An agonizing pain struck. Edgar's pupils dilated and trembled violently. He had directly bitten through Edgar's gland, claiming him with an inescapable injection of his pheromones. In an instant, the ambiguous lighting in the bedroom was crushed by a terrifying power. A heavy, dark, golden halo detonated in the air, swirling frantically around them like tangible amber quicksand. The absolute domination of an apex predator. How is this possible? Edgar's face drained of all color. A lightning bolt of realization struck his brain. He thrashed and twisted wildly like a fish out of water. Fuck. You're a fucking alpha? The man behind him completely tore away his disguise. With just one hand, he effortlessly suppressed Edgar's kicking legs. Why are you running? Didn't you say you wanted a child? Fuck. You're insane. Stop it right now. I'm an alpha. Hubby, just relax. Get off. You fucking... Shh. No swearing. The next morning, Edgar bolted awake, every bone in his body screaming in an agonizing, shattered soreness. The gland at his nape throbbed with a swollen, piercing sting, and the devastating ache in his lower back made his muscles cramp uncontrollably. In a daze, he turned his head. His pupils contracted violently. That lying bastard was sleeping comfortably on his arm, a long limb locked in a death grip around his waist. His long eyelashes fluttered faintly in sleep, the very picture of serene innocence. The humiliating flashes of last night exploded in his mind. He wasn't a fucking Omega at all. Marriage fraud. Extortion. And he had the nerve to con him out of his own body. A fiery rage surged from Edgar's chest. He violently yanked his numb arm free. Min? The man on the bed startled awake. Groggily opening those fathomless eyes, he leaned in with devastating naturalness to steal a morning kiss. Hubby's awake? Sleep a little longer. Get lost. Edgar shoved him away in absolute disgust. The sudden movement pulled at places he couldn't even speak of, and Edgar distinctly felt a highly unnatural, lingering dampness. He froze for 3 solid seconds. Then, his face flushed a furious, boiling crimson. Scrambling over like a bristling hedgehog, he grabbed the man by the collar. You didn't fucking clean me up last night? Instead of looking even remotely guilty, a victorious smirk hooked the corner of the man's mouth. This way, the chances of getting pregnant are much higher. Screw you. Edgar, furious beyond words, threw a fist and smashed it right into that handsome face. The man didn't dodge or flinch. He took the punch head on, letting out a low, muffled grunt. It wasn't until Edgar was panting heavily, shaking out his numb wrist, that the man obediently knelt on the messy rug and began to confess his crimes. To boil it down, the Jones family had twins. The Omega younger brother, Arnold, ran away from the wedding. To secure the financial lifeline, The older brother Albert, an alpha possessing a top-tier S-class aura, took his brother's place at the altar. "Do you take my family for fools?" Edgar laughed out of pure, unadulterated anger. Sporting a bruised cheek, Albert tilted his head up and argued his case. "Aside from our secondary genders, we look exactly the same. Anything he can do, I can do. I can even do it better." Edgar rolled his eyes to the heavens, pointing aggressively at his own flat stomach. "He can give birth? Can you?" Albert's gaze drifted slowly down to Edgar's stomach, his tone carrying an absolute, undeniable certainty. "I can make you carry it. My aura is an S-class domination. You still dare to say that?" Edgar erupted, raising his fist once more. Albert instantly snapped his mouth shut, looking terribly wrong. Using his knees as feet, he expertly shuffled to the edge of the bed. Like a massive, overgrown puppy, he affectionately nuzzled his cheek against the side of Edge's leg. "I'm sorry, hubby. I was wrong. You can punish me however you want, just don't be mad anymore, okay?" His sincerity was flawless, but Edgar wasn't buying a single second of it. He kicked the manipulative hound away. Clutching his aching lower back, he limped toward the bathroom. "Did I tell you to get up? Get your ass back there and kneel straight." The bathroom door slammed shut. After washing up, Edgar stormed back out trailing a cloud of steam and promptly gifted Albert 2 more slaps across the face. Albert's god-like face immediately swelled up, yet he didn't even bat an eye. Instead, he grabbed Edgar's reddened hand, blowing on it with agonizing tenderness while gently kneading the skin. "Did it hurt your hand? Save it. Don't think for a second. I'm going to forgive you." Edgar coldly snatched his hand back. "We are far from done here." Before the words even settled, the eager to please smile vanished from Albert's lips. He slowly stood up. The previously docile look in his eyes morphed into an inescapable magnetism. A dark golden glimmer flowed dangerously deep within his gaze. "Are you backing out of our deal?" The overwhelming size difference and the crushing absolute domination of an S-class alpha washed over him. Edgar instinctively took half a step back. But in the very next heartbeat, Albert's eyes flushed violently red. Massive, heavy tears crashed onto the rug without a single shred of warning. The speed of this mood swing meant the Oscars owed him a golden statuette. Edgar's mouth twitched. Suddenly feeling a bizarre pang of guilt, he tore his gaze away. "Use your words. Crying doesn't solve anything." Seeing the pity play wasn't sticking, Albert instantly switched lanes and pulled out his trump card. "You swore a vicious oath yesterday. You promised never to abandon me. And I have the video to prove it. You tricked me into saying that." Albert puffed out his chest, utterly unashamed. "Which part was a lie? I never said I was Arnold, and I never said I wasn't an alpha. You never asked, so how could I just bring it up? And furthermore..." Albert raised his voice so aggrieved he was practically sobbing. "From the day we got married until now, have you actually listened to a single complete sentence from me? You were either too impatient trying to get into my pants, or you were kicking me off the bed and out of the room, or even running out in the middle of the night to find other Omegas. Did you ever give me a chance to explain? You were the one who said you wanted a child, and I satisfied you. But the moment it's over, you turn your back on me. Edgar, what exactly do you take me for?" The rapid-fire combination of accusations was flawlessly executed and dripped with genuine emotion. If Edgar weren't the one on the receiving end, he would have shed a tear for this tragic, beautiful romance. The kicker was, this alpha's logic was so airtight, Edgar literally couldn't find a single word to refute him. He took a deep breath, grinding his teeth as he violently passed the buck. "Whining to me won't do you any good. Go talk to my mother. She calls the shots in this family." 2 fiery sparks instantly ignited in Albert's red, swollen eyes. "As long as Mom agrees, you're willing?" Edgar let out a cold sneer in his mind. His iron-fisted mother despised being lied to more than anything. When Edgar lied as a kid, she chased him 3 blocks with a feather duster. If Albert went to confess, she would absolutely tear him to shreds. A malicious glint pulled at the corner of Edgar's eyes. "Yep, as long as you can convince her, I have no objections." "That's wonderful." Albert rejoiced like a massive puppy given a treat. He pulled Edgar into a crushing embrace, nuzzling his soft hair frantically into the crook of Edgar's neck. "I will do my absolute best." After holding him for a moment, Albert lifted his head. Those deeply affectionate eyes sparkled as they stared right into Edgar's. "I'm sorry, hubby. I was too excited just now and raised my voice at you. The thought of you not wanting me just makes me lose all control." "Hubby, I adore you. I never want to leave you. With every sickeningly sweet hubby, accompanied by a deliberately restrained, gentle aura, Edgar was bombarded into a dizzying haze. A bizarre thought actually flashed through his mind. Having a gorgeous specimen like this waiting on me hand and foot every day. Maybe it wouldn't be such a bad deal? Smack! Edgar pinched his own thigh hard, forcefully rebooting his brain. Who knows if you're just putting on another Oscar-winning performance? Feel it. Albert frantically grabbed Edgar's hand, pressing it firmly against the left side of his chest. When a person lies, their heart beats faster. A powerful, incredibly steady rhythm pulsed against his palm. Edgar scoffed coldly. That only proves you're a habitual liar who doesn't blink twice. Cool as a cucumber, without skipping a beat. Before the words even settled, Albert suddenly dropped to one knee. Swish, his long, elegant fingers flawlessly snagged and pulled open the tie of Edge's bathrobe. The chill of the early autumn wind rushed into his open collar, sending a violent shiver down Edgar's spine. What are you doing? The very end of his sentence warped into a sweet, breathless pitch, the second Albert dipped his head. It was over. The sanity he had barely managed to claw back officially declared a strike. Amidst wave after wave of spine, tingling, intoxicating shudders, that low, devastatingly seductive voice kept whispering against his ear, "Hubby." An involuntary, flushed crimson swept across the corners of Edgar's eyes. Unable to hold back any longer, a dopey smile slipped out as he forced a single sound from his throat. "I'm here, wife." 2 hours later, clutching his aching lower back that felt like it was snapping in two, Edgar walked through the grand doors of his mother's estate looking every bit the defeated prisoner of war, his face screaming, "I deeply regret my life choice." Trailing right behind him was Albert, sporting a bruised cheek, yet still looking as incredibly docile as a massive golden retriever. The moment they stepped inside, his mother's piercing gaze swept over them like a scanner. She instantly locked onto Edgar's slightly swollen lips and the glaring crimson marks littering his neck, peeking out from beneath his collar. A profoundly gratified smile immediately bloomed across her well-maintained face. However, that smile lasted exactly 2 seconds. When her gaze bypassed Edgar and landed on the bruised, battered state of Albert's incredibly handsome face, her smile instantly froze. "Move!" She shoved Edgar out of the way, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her hands came up to tenderly cradle Albert's face, her voice laced with heartache. "Arnold, what on earth happened to your face?" Albert lowered his eyelashes slightly. His deeply wronged gaze floated right over her shoulder, landing squarely on Edgar. Edgar's eye twitched. Grinding his back teeth, he frantically mouthed a silent, vicious warning. "If you dare say I did it, you are dead meat." But no one knows a son better than his mother. She flawlessly intercepted the silent, crackling crossfire between them. Pulling Albert's large hand into her own, her gaze turned razor sharp. "Don't be afraid, child." Her voice was fierce. "Did this little bastard Edgar bully you?" There stood the top-tier alpha, the possessor of terrifying S-class pheromones. The dark, golden halo capable of crushing everything in its path was entirely gone. In its place was a harmless, pitifully endearing filter, making him look exactly like a startled little bunny. He pulled a fragile, sweet smile onto his lips. "No, Mom. Edgar is incredibly good to me. I just accidentally fell." "You fell and magically got symmetrical handprints on your face?" Her anger flared. "Tell me the truth. I will stand up for you." Edgar nearly coughed up a lung. Completely out of patience, he raised his voice. "Mom, I'm your actual son. Hez the one who bullied me, okay?" His backside was still in absolute agony. "Try sprouting that nonsense again?" Showing absolutely no mercy, his mother grabbed him by the ear and twisted it a full 180 degrees. "Arnold is an absolute angel. How could he possibly bully you?" Hiss. "Ow, ow, ow." Tears sprang to Edgar's eyes from the stinging pain. Throwing all caution to the wind, he pointed right at Albert and roared. "His whole fucking family are a bunch of con artists. That isn't Arnold standing in front of you. That is his twin brother, Albert." The air froze for a split second. His mother's hand, still clutching Edge's ear, stopped dead in mid-air. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked at Albert. Seizing the opportunity, Edgar snatched his ear back and retreated to a safe distance. Rubbing his bright red earlobe, he frantically added fuel to the fire. "Did you hear me? Hez an alpha. Your precious dream of having a grandson is completely dead in the water." Thump. Albert's knees gave out. His towering frame dropped straight to the floor. Keeping his head bowed, his voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry, Mom. Edgar crossed his arms, a victorious, wicked smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. Bring it on. Let the storm rage. Albert was definitely losing a layer of skin today. 1 second. 2 seconds. Oh, is that all? His mother waved her hand dismissively. Bending down, she effortlessly hauled Albert right up from the floor. Get up now, the floor is cold. The wicked smirk on Edgar's face violently shattered. Huh? Unwilling to give up, he marched right back up, pointing a finger directly at Albert's nose as he yelled. Mom, are you deaf? He lied to you? He is an alpha. Turning a completely deaf ear, his mother looked at Albert with nothing but sheer maternal affection. She led the utterly bewildered man to the leather sofa, sitting him down, and even poured him a glass of warm water herself. Deeply flattered and overwhelmed, Albert took it with both hands. An innocent light flickered in his amber eyes. Thank you, Mom. She affectionately stroked his soft golden hair, her gaze so tender it could melt ice. From beginning to end, she didn't spare a single glance for her actual flesh and blood, standing right next to them. Edge's mind completely short-circuited. Jumping around like a cat whose tail had just been stepped on, he yelled, Mom, did you even hear a word I just said? Only then did his mother turn her head. She looked Edgar up and down as if he were a complete idiot, her eyes dripping with undisguised disgust. Of course I heard you. I'm not deaf. The very first time I saw him, I knew something was off. Broad shoulders, built like that, how on earth could he be an Omega? Do you really think I survived in the business world all these years by being a clueless idiot like you? Now it was Edge's turn to blue screen. His eyes wide, he stammered, then, if you knew, why did you still force me to marry him? Unhurriedly, his mother picked up her black tea and took a slow sip. Her tone was as impossibly calm as if they were discussing what to have for dinner. Oh, well, after I realized something was off, I pulled up your medical records and consulted the doctors. The doctor said that even though you're a defective alpha, your physique and bone structure are rather unique. Your reproductive cavity might be small, but it is fully developed. She paused for a moment. Then, her red lips parted to deliver 4 cold, absolutely ruthless words. You can get pregnant. Boom! It felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck Edgar right on the top of his skull, frying him to an absolute crisp. Furthermore, his mother added, giving Albert's solid shoulder an approving pat, I think Albert is a good kid with a kind heart. I'm sure he'll take excellent care of you. I've taken a liking to him, and frankly, I couldn't be bothered with the hassle of annulling the marriage. Sitting on the sofa, Albert instantly lifted that sweet, harmless face. Looking up at Edgar with bright, sparkling eyes, the invisible tail behind him wagged so hard it was practically a blur. Mom is exactly right. Hubby, I will be so good to you. Good, my ass. Edge's entire worldview had shattered into pieces. He roared in exasperated fury. I'm a fucking alpha. Why the hell do I have to be the one to give birth? Setting down her teacup, his mother swept a highly critical gaze over Edgar's frame, which was half a head shorter than Albert's, and his distinctly unnatural stance. She let out a cold scoff, arching a single brow high into her hairline. Isn't it obvious enough? With your pathetic combat power, exactly who could you ever dominate? Edgar was struck entirely speechless. His cheeks flushed a violent crimson in an instant, looking exactly like a boiled shrimp. Seeing this, Albert instantly stood up, a look of profound heartache crossing his face. His towering frame once again closed the distance to Edgar's side. Tilting his head down slightly, he used that devastating, intoxicatingly deep voice to gently coax right against Edgar's ear. Hubby, don't be mad. I'll listen to whatever you say. If you want a child, we'll have one. If you don't, then we won't. Okay? Edgar stared dead into this face that was absolutely overflowing with deep devotion and flawless obedience. Taking a deep breath, he pointed squarely at the door and squeezed out 2 words from between his gritted teeth. Get out.
And with that, Edgar and Albert's story comes to a close. Even though Edgar literally pointed at the door and told Albert to get out, I have zero doubt that Albert will manage to coax him right back. After all, Edgar is the ultimate paper tiger. He puts on this high and mighty front and loves to throw around vicious words. But that dominant streak is entirely skin deep. The second he runs into someone truly formidable, he completely folds. On top of that, Edgar is an absolute sucker for a soft approach. The moment Albert puts on that pitiful wounded act, Edga's fury evaporates, replaced by a bizarre, unprompted wave of guilt. Couple that with the fact that Albert possesses a face Edgar finds completely irresistible. Honestly, the moment he met Albert, Edgar was doomed. And Albert isn't just a pretty face, he's dangerously brilliant. As an alpha wielding absolute top-tier power, it took him exactly one night to completely dissect Edga's weaknesses. When it comes to securing Edgar's forgiveness, Albert will drop his dignity without a second thought. He has zero reservations about dropping to his knees, playing the victim, or shamelessly begging for favor. Yet when it comes to claiming what's his, like the matter of having a child, Albert unleashes the absolute, inescapable domination of a true alpha. In Albert's world, pride means absolutely nothing as long as he gets exactly what he wants. Besides, what kind of idiot chooses pride over his wife? Ultimately, naive little Edgar going up against Albert is like a rabbit stepping right into a fox's den. He never stood a single chance. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.